Hello?
Hello.
We're here.
All right.
We're live as well.
Shelley, at 6:30, when you think we're ready to go and people are queued up, can you just say we're ready and I can start then?
Yes, I sure can.
Okay. Is there any way we could get the slides to be the slideshow and not just the tiles?
Sure.
There we go.
Hi, Bill.
John, how are you?
Good.
Expecting a full house, I understand.
Yes, about 62 or so.
And Sarah is still in a meeting, not sure what time she can join. So we'll just play it by ear in terms of who's talking to which slide from the tribal side.
Sounds good.
John, are you controlling the screen and scrolling through the slides?
Yes, I will be MC.
Okay. And how are you going to take questions?
We're waiting, but we won't take questions till the very end, and we'll start with the chat box, and Wade Burkholder will go through the questions one by one, read them off, and then we'll kind of decide who can take that question. I'll probably field most of them, but we may, if there's something specific to architecture, we'll probably throw it to you.
Okay, great.
And then after that, we'll just go through people who raise their hands in order, and they'll get to speak.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we
Yes.
got you, Dan, and we're also recording.
Okay, thank you. I won't cuss.
That's helpful. Shelley, are we ready to start? Once more, Shelley, are we ready to start? We ready to go?
Hold on, Brad.
Okay, tell me when you're ready. Thank you.
We're ready to go live.
Thank you, Shelley. Good evening, everyone. My name is Brad Power. I'm the Director of the Community Development Department for the City of Englewood. Welcome this evening. Our purpose tonight is to share some information regarding how rezoning CityCenter could set the stage for its next generation. We also want to have the opportunity to hear your comments and questions a little bit later after our presentation. We'll hear a little bit about the history of the site. We'll see some examples of developments near transit stations from other parts of the Denver metro area. And we'll also review some of the actions that we've been taking to facilitate CityCenter's future redevelopment by attracting new investment. The rezoning of the site is an important step, but it's also an early step. There's still a lot of work to be done by the city and our development partners to settle on specific plans for future redevelopment. A public-private partnership will guide CityCenter's next generation, which was also the case when it was opened 21 years ago. The Englewood City Council will be the decision makers on behalf of the community in terms of the components of future redevelopment plans. We anticipate that specific plans for the area could be considered, hopefully by early next year. Thanks again for joining us this evening. I'd now like to introduce John Voberl, our senior planner, who will start the program this evening. Thanks.
Good evening. My name is John Voberl, and I will be your host for the Englewood Station CityCenter Redevelopment, Revitalization, and Reinvention, a virtual public meeting for this evening. Our format tonight is we will have a PowerPoint presentation followed by questions and group discussion. The meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the City of Englewood meetings portal. Attendees may enter questions into the chat box at any time. Questions will be addressed at the beginning of the questions and discussion segment. Staff will start by going through each of the questions asked in the chat box. Staff will then open up the floor to allow the audience to give verbal feedback on any information presented this evening. Please use the raise hand icon to signal to the meeting moderator that you would like to make a comment. Wait for the meeting moderator to call your name. Each speaker will be allocated 3 minutes of speaking time. Please also visit our project webpage for more information at www.engage.co.gov/citycenter-redevelopment. And also remember that questions can be submitted at any time after this presentation by phone or email to myself, John Voberl, at 303-783-6820 or jvoberil@englewoodco.gov. That is J, V as in Victor, OBORIL at englewoodco.gov. And if you happen to miss this and unable to write that down, it will be also posted at the very end of this presentation. Now let's go over the meeting agenda and presenters for this evening. I think Brad Power has already made his introduction, so we may skip that, but if he has some more additional things to say, that'd be great too. Then I will give a little bit of a site history, and then we'll turn it over to our guest perspective, planner architects Bill Moon and Sarah Compa from Triba Architects. And Triba Architects was the original planner and designer on the CityCenter Inwood project back in 2000. Then we will turn it over to Dan Paremba, who is the Chief Redevelopment Officer for the City of Englewood, and he will give a listing of the reasons why we need to look at redevelopment at CityCenter. Then he will give it back to Bill and Sarah, and they will give a local transit-oriented development perspective for developments throughout the Denver metro area. Then it will go back to Dan Paremba, and he will talk about the recent steps that the city has made toward redevelopment. And then we'll also get, once again, a planners and architects perspective on these recent steps that we've made toward redevelopment. And then I will take up the last half of the presentation, discussing the Planning and Zoning Commission's recommended rezoning strategy. And then finally, we will have the question and discussion period. and all of the speakers will be available to take different various questions. Brad, are you good with your introduction?
It's all yours, John. Take it away.
Okay. All right, let's talk about the site history. So this picture on the left-hand side is was taken around the late 50s, early 60s. And at this time, the black boundary that is, you can see there on that picture, is the city center approximate boundary that is of today. And at this time, this was actually Englewood City Park, largely undeveloped. You do see a baseball diamond in the bottom right-hand corner. I believe there may have been some swimming and some golf facilities as well, but it's largely relatively undeveloped, and it was zoned R1A single family. In the mid 60s, a mall developer named Jerry Froelich became interested in Englewood, and he wanted to build a regional mall. And he first was interested in the site over at what is now the Kimberly Woods and the Marks Apartments at Hampden Avenue and Gerard Place. Cherry Hills residents from the other side of the street were not too thrilled with that, so Jerry started looking farther west, and he came upon this city center park area that was well located at the intersection of Santa Fe Drive and Hampden Avenue. And he made a deal with the city, and the city was able to take the money that they got from the proceeds of the sale of this park to then turn around and purchase park properties throughout the city. And in order to accomplish this, the Cinderella City Mall site was zoned to B1 business, the same as the adjoining area to the east. The mall had a very good run for about 20 years. And then, of course, things started to slide. Things had changed enough where there was more competition in the Denver market from new malls such as South Glen and from Southwest Plaza and a revamped Cherry Creek Mall. And so the sales started to drop. And by the late 1990s, the mall was basically closed up. And it was hurting the city significantly. And so the city had to scramble to try to redevelop the site. And the chosen methodology to do that was through a planned unit development, which is a zoning process that is allows kind of a designer zoning type of situation that was found in our code at that time, which is still in our code today. And this was the very second planned unit development that we had in our city. The City Center Englewood opened in conjunction with the Southwest Light Rail extension in 2000, and it was Metro Denver's first TOD, which is a transit-oriented development, approximately 1 million square feet. And it featured 438 residential units, civic center government offices such as library and cultural arts facilities. It also featured office and big box retailers and an RTD park and ride that featured 910 shared spaces. It also included special features such as a public plaza featuring fountain and sculptures, as well as the small format retail office Main Street directly to the east. And at this time, I'd like to turn it over to our special guest presenter, Tribal Architects, to give their perspective on the history of Englewood City Center.
Thank you, John. Hi, everyone. I'm Bill Moon with Tribal Architects. You know, the slide that you're seeing here represents kind of an evolution of thinking that was going on at the time. Obviously, starting with the old mall, which was abandoned and was rapidly decaying. It was also a significant sales tax generator for the city when it was thriving, but now had become really a challenge. The city had serious financial issues because they had lost that sales tax. So in the pursuing effort to redevelop and re-envision, there was a desire by the market to continue to see this as a big box retail dominated space You can see the sketch in the upper right-hand corner in the plan here with the pink boxes represent large-scale big boxes, and the white represents a lot of surface parking. So in essence, it was imploding the mall inside out. That was how the market responded. The city, in its wisdom, believed that there was a better opportunity here with the light rail coming. Remember when this started, light rail system was just still new to Denver, and the station hadn't even been built in Englewood yet. So what type of development would the market as well as the community like to see was discussed. And there was a mix of uses that arrived, not just retail big boxes, but in fact, at the time, people living at the light rail station was something new and fresh and had not yet been seen in the Metro Denver market. But the civic and cultural facilities were also heavily desired by the citizens, as well as convenient retail shopping. The city also wanted to see retail and was open to some big box, but not dominated by big box, in order to start generating the sales tax needed for the city. There was certainly a place that was decided to look for that's generated in the Fountain area, and the connection directly to the light rail through the bridge. It was also continued to be very convenient for light rail to bus transfer and the bus transfer station itself. So a very robust moment of different programming. And this was still kind of an experiment of a development type that the private market was still getting their arms around. Of consequence, what was important in the first phase development was establishing the infrastructure. These are things like the utilities and the drainage and the roadways, allowing for this space to continue to evolve. It was never conceived that what's at Englewood City Center today was the finished development. There was a remnant of a building that was left. It was the May DNF building, the last building on site that the current City of Englewood Civic Center occupies. When that building was initially designed, it was designed for a 10-year shelf life as a retail big box. And the structure itself sags, and the exterior skin is of low quality material, concrete block in essence. So it's been repurposed for a temporary use by the City of Englewood, but was never seen as a permanent building to stay in place. As the market evolved and as Denver citizens started to understand how they'd use light rail, there was always an idea that this place would continue to evolve and thrive. John, I think I turn it back to you now.
Thank you, Bill.
Or Dan.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, John. I just want to hit on some of the things that have happened since the center opened 21 years ago, and particularly over the last 10 years. And many of us are just familiar with these factors just through everyday life and watching the evolution of CityCenter. So one of the big ones is the switch consumer tastes and preferences to so much online retail shopping. And that had a particularly damaging impact on many of the junior box and big box stores. So many people don't come to those stores anymore. And when they do, they're looking for a different environment now than they were 20 years ago. 20 years ago, the big fields of parking, the ability to park immediately adjacent to the stores, all of that was really the top goal. Today, consumers are looking for an environment, people, places to go to where there's things of interest, places to dine, etc. And what you need to really generate that kind of environment is mixes of uses, higher density, higher building heights, and parking that's more stacked than surface parking. So that was a complete evolution over particularly the last 10 years that's really had a significant impact on CityCenter. The other thing that happened is that TOD development, transit-oriented development, all of a sudden became all the rage. So there are many, many TOD locations today, not only in Denver, but across the country. And the strange thing is that's where the overwhelming majority of new development is taking place because of the benefits of mixing real estate and transit. Of course, another big occurrence at CityCenter was the foreclosure of the Weingarten property, and we'll outline that for you here momentarily, but that occurred in August of 2018. And that is what really opened the door for the city council to look at its bundle of interests in CityCenter and how to protect and enhance those interests going forward. Without that foreclosure, we probably wouldn't be having this discussion today. But the public is aware, we've seen long-term vacancies develop at CityCenter. We have the Office Depot closing in a month or so. We have the 24-hour fitness building that's been closed. And of course, these closures were really accelerated last year with the impacts of COVID. We've also seen the properties, the large surface, old-fashioned, if you will, retail properties, Englewood Marketplace and Englewood Plaza, that lie between CityCenter and downtown. We've seen a lot of vacancy there, and it's extremely likely that that vacancy will continue to rise and that those properties will probably quite soon come up for redevelopment. But one of the things I was just going to mention on this page, and it's really relevant to what we're doing with the rezoning, is the amount of competition we now have from other TOD locations, both locally and nationally. Very, very strong. So a key aspect in terms of the strategy for redevelopment at CityCenter is we have to find ways to make our development opportunities comparable to what developers, employers, investors, and others are seeing at other TOD locations. We just have to make our TOD comparable to those. And so you'll get a sense here momentarily about what's going on at those other locations. And that is what really drives this fundamental need through zoning to change the heights, the densities, the uses, and the parking requirements, as John will talk about later. Next slide. Just briefly, the redevelopment goals are, we really want to reverse the negative impacts of the downward trending, dated, low density, retail focused city center. We want to add uses, particularly hotel. We'd like to see more office, and of course, residential at this location is really going to drive the placemaking opportunity that we have. We also have a brand new opportunity, which is really to use the CityCenter redevelopment in tandem with our new Downtown Development Authority to revitalize all of downtown, not just CityCenter, but to revitalize CityCenter plus South Broadway plus the medical district. And of course, you know, financially, we want to increase sales, property taxes, and other city revenues. It's really quite amazing that due to the way that the financial structure was originally put together, the city today really receives no current pure real estate revenues for the value of its real estate interests at CityCenter. And all of this at the end of the day is really necessary to help retain and attract Englewood employers, residents, downtown retailers, and restaurants. And with that, I'll turn it back to Bill Moon.
Thanks, Dan. I think, you know, one of the things to keep in mind is that the site that we're looking at is actually quite large, and the amount of uses and density that's on the site compared to what the possibility can be is quite low. Recall that we mentioned that the investment the city has already made in the infrastructure for the entire site has already been put in place. So the capacity for the roadway network and the utilities and the drainage and things like that, that investment's been made. What we think when we look at what's missing is what's shown in the images here. You know, really kind of friendly, high quality spaces where pedestrians would want to come to. We'd like to see CityCenter as a place where people want to come to, not that they have to come to. This would be a destination regardless if you live there or work there or played there. It's a place you'd want to be. So what are the types of amenities, the types of uses, and the types of materials that will draw citizens of Englewood to this place. I think looking at how we can catalyze, again, what's already there and transform it into the next generation, so that there's a real energy for everybody coming to the site or living on the site. One of the things that we continue to need metro-wide is more housing and more diversification of housing. Right now, there's a market rate apartments is kind of your one choice on city center property. If we can look at alternative choices, I think it would be a richer environment. Next slide. So just a couple of very quick comparisons of, so what's going on around other cities near Englewood at their light rail stations. A very good comparison is at the Denver Design District or South Broadway Marketplace at Broadway and Alameda. They too found themselves, the city of Denver at the time, with a lot of big box retail and a lot of surface parking with the light rail station attached to it. They're currently under the redevelopment of that entire area. It's including new, more neighborhood retail, neighborhood-friendly retail, local retail, mixed use of multifamily and commercial office, and is really starting to generate a lot of traffic to and from that light rail station. So the investment that they have made in the infrastructure and now the upcoming development is something that's really occurring. You may have also seen that they have made recent investments in public art. So really also them creating spaces that are cultural based is something that Englewood already has an advantage of by having the Museum of Outdoor Arts already located on site with their art pieces scattered throughout. So how do we take advantage of that and really create something that's unique and special for Englewood? Next slide. Another comparison is what's been going on recently over at the Broadway Station, I-25 and Broadway, the old Gates factory site. You've seen the east side of that development kind of get redeveloped. It now has single family, multifamily, grocery store, retail and commercial office. The west side is just starting construction there, but it has similarly been rezoned to allow an even greater mix of uses and placemaking. Next slide. And I think this is our last comparison, which continues to be in progress. And this is in Greenwood Village at the Denver Tech Center, I-25 and Bellevue on a former golf course. They had to go in and build the infrastructure, the roadways and the utilities, and then come in and develop the individual vertical parcels. The rezoning there has resulted in significant amount of density and high quality development. These are mid to high rises. It's not necessarily the type of buildings that are being proposed in this rezoning, but the density that it's drawing and the type of retail for this area of town has really made this quite a popular destination.
Thanks, Bill. I'll pick it up and just really want to provide a little bit of context in terms of the things we have been working on over the last 2 years to move redevelopment forward. And we have two big relationships, two big agreements that you'll hear us reference, and they kind of set the stage for the redevelopment. The first one is referred to as a preliminary development agreement, or PDA. And that agreement is with a firm called SKB, sometimes referred to as Scanlon Kemper Bard. And the other agreement, which you'll see referred to on the following page, is a framework agreement, and that's with LNR Partners. And they actually represent the bondholders who foreclosed on the former Weingarten property. And that's the property in red in this site plan. Then the property in blue is the property, we refer to it as a city property. And we went through a year-long competitive master development process. And that is how we selected the firm of SKB. So we have entered into a preliminary development agreement with them in June of last year. And that was just extended by the City Council 2 weeks ago on April 19th. to basically extend the planning process that they're involved with city staff on through the end of this year. And we're working toward an overall redevelopment plan together that'll be the basis of what's envisioned to be a master development agreement that'll guide the long-term relationship of the city and SKB and the envisioned redevelopment. And I just want to emphasize something that Brad mentioned early on, and that's that these plans are completely in flux. There's a lot of moving pieces to them. COVID has had a big impact. Our attempts to put public finance tools in place will continue to have an impact as well. Next slide. This is the second agreement that I referred to. It's the framework agreement. And again, this is with L&R Partners referring, and it relates to the property in red here. And basically in October of last year, City Council agreed with staff's recommendations to move forward with this framework agreement. And there are three things that it seeks to do. One, ultimately, it sets out a path for the termination of the underlying ground lease that's below the red property. There's about 54 years now left on that term. And because of the way ground leases are financed in the marketplace, it effectively stunts any redevelopment that the ground lessee would do on this site. So we really need, in one form or another, to terminate that ground lease. The second thing it did, and this was really for the benefit of both SKB and L&R and the properties and the developers that they'll be selling to ultimately, is we really needed to rezone and update the zoning at CityCenter. And that'll be really the detail of tonight's discussion. And then as part of the framework agreement, there was also a brief discussion, and council provided its preliminary endorsement of a multifamily project on the south half of what we refer to as Block C. And that is currently occupied by Office Depot and Harbor Freight. John, next slide. So here's the backdrop on the framework agreement and why it was so important to move forward with it. The alternative that L&R had at the time was to basically lease up the vacancies, extend leases, then try to sell the property as is. And that had some really downside consequences for the city. The extension of the leases and the renewals of some of the leases would have taken the property out of play as a redevelopment opportunity for probably the next 10 to 25 years. And so the property would have continued to date, its financial performance would have continued to decline, and council agreed that that was really not the most favorable scenario going forward. So that is really the basis of the framework agreement. And then we were aided in this, in that COVID really helped bring L&R back to the negotiating table with the city, in that they saw, as a result of COVID, the marketability and the value of that property decrease in the marketplace. And so the benefit for the city is that they have been really engaged with us in trying to come up with a redevelopment strategy that will allow them ultimately to dispose of that property as more of a redevelopment opportunity than a as-is sale. And that's also given them a lot of motivation to work both with the city and with SKB in terms of ways to knit the two properties together, the SKB property as well as the L&R property. And with that, back to you, Bill, one more time.
Thanks, Dan. So just a real quick preview of what's on the site today from a graphic perspective. This is a site plan, and you can kind of read on the screen what's currently occupying there. But if you recall, kind of from upper left to bottom right, we have a very large surface parking lot to the very extreme left that's used today by RTD for the light rail station. The boxes that look kind of square with spaces in the middle, those are the two apartment buildings that exist today, and Walmart's adjacent to that. We then have Englewood Parkway running right through the middle of the site to the oval. This takes you to the plaza and the bridge and the light rail station. The diagonal building, the big box there's is currently Englewood's offices. And we have a large parking deck behind that's behind the Chuck E. Cheese. A couple of outline boxes along Hampden. And then we have 2-story buildings fronting Englewood Parkway. And then it falls off to a sea of parking for Walmart and some other big boxes along Hampden. So this plan, as I said before, a couple of things to keep in mind here. One is likely the residential projects do add life, and people are living there and add vibrancy to the street. And those have been very successful projects. The idea of having Englewood Parkway two-sided with retail on both sides is something that has been successful here. And we'd like to see that continue going forward with local retail, food and beverage, coffee shops, cafes, utilizing the sidewalks, creating really a people place there. Some of the, you can see the large scale footprint of the current Englewood Civic Center building and the parking affiliated with that. That's actually almost, I think, 8 to 9 acres of land that's really being used with has a greater purpose and opportunity, especially being this close to the light rail station itself. The other challenge that you have no doubt witnessed over the time being at CityCenter is the use of the plaza or the lack thereof. There's some meant to be retail along the apartment building that's in the plaza, fronting the plaza, and then kind of the side building of the Civic Center. There's quite a bit of space there that's just not really utilized. And we want to kind of think about how to revision that. There's some real positives, we think, to the green outdoor space, and how can we take that and enhance it. Maybe the next slide, John. So these were, again, just some images of the type of spaces that we see on the streets, in between the buildings, real opportunities. Some of these spaces I think you may recognize in your strolls throughout Denver, including in front of Union Station. But you know, how to bring shade and green and landscape to this site so that it becomes really something that can be utilized all 4 seasons. The idea of having the streetscape activated with outdoor cafes, pedestrians first, really a lively environment that can draw from the uses that are on site. Next slide. And as Dan said, this isn't really a design yet. It's really just a beginning of a vision that the market starts to inform us on. But you can start to see how we build upon the infrastructure that's there. In this particular case, we drew a line basically and said, if the Walmart side stays for some point in the future for future development, what happens on the left side there? So you can see where the 2 apartments remain. In this scenario, the RTD parking remains to the upper north. And we start to look at infilling some of the surface parking and adding new service streets and outdoor green spaces in between buildings. And these are the types of uses that we're looking at, whether they be commercial office, additional multifamily space with retail below, hospitality with a boutique hotel, with the city rethinking how the city works and the type of spaces that may be more beneficial to the city employees and to the services that the city provides to the citizens, and additional retail, but all created within a framework where the outdoor spaces between the buildings can really be more than just a one-liner or a nice fountain to look at or green space. These can really be occupied, and program can start to happen, whether they're farmers markets or outdoor festivals or activities, and the retailers can start to utilize this space, especially say the Museum of Outdoor Arts, and really start to program these spaces for not only for this development, but for the entire community. So just again, supplementing some of the things we talked about, the spaces in between the buildings, you know, have an opportunity. This is an example of, say, a beer garden like the one located out at Lowry, or Holstein festivals like the farmers market that I mentioned earlier. So these streets really are not just car devoted, and they can be programmed and utilized. And maybe there's times where vehicles don't use the streets, and it's a festival for people first.
All right, thank you, Bill. I will now pick it up with the what the Planning and Zoning Commission has been working on for the last 6 months. They have understood these scenarios, and they understand the underlying conditions that we are in currently. They've gone through these materials with Dan with the framework agreements and things like that. And so we started working with them about 6 months ago to develop a recommended rezoning strategy that will help us get there and make these redevelopments actually happen. So there are 3 different pieces that we have identified as critical to this rezoning process. Basically, we are looking to go back from the planned unit development zoning that we had for the original city center Englewood, and we're looking to go back and rezone that back to what it was prior to city center, which was MUB1, which is the same zoning as the area to the east, including our historical downtown Broadway area. We do feel that we need to make a couple of different amendments to that zoning, however, to make it work. And those 2 areas are hotel as a land use and ground floor commercial as a land use. And I will get into the details of that in a little bit. We also then will need to once we make the text amendments, then we can actually formally rezone to from planned unit development to MUB1. And then the third piece of this puzzle is actually creating an evolving transit station area overlay district that provides city representatives the flexibility to negotiate proposed site plans. And critical parameters that will need to be specified for this is residential density and parking, commercial parking, and building height. Now I just want to make a caveat that this transit station area overlay is not going to cover the entire MUB1 zone district. It is only going to cover the portions within a 1.5 mile from the Englewood Light Rail Station and apply to those areas only. It will not apply to the Broadway corridor. The text amendments and the formal base district rezoning and the TSA overlay district will be processed as 2 concurrent cases. So let's talk about land uses. SKB is interested in the possibility of a hotel. However, MUB1 zoning does not permit hotels as allowed uses. We reviewed past Inwood zoning codes to see how that has varied over time. In the 1940 code, the only place in the city that hotels were allowed was the R3 zone district, which was actually over by Swedish and Craig Hospital. In 1955, they made a different choice and then allowed hotel use in what is then called Commercial 1 and Commercial 2, which is now we refer to as B1 and B2. And in 63, they added it back into the hospital district at R3B. 85 took it out. And then in 2004, for some reason, took it out of the B1, but kept it in the B2, and then added TSA, the industrial 1, and then later on in 2009, the medical 1 and medical 2 zone district, which is Swedish and Craig. The recommendation from the Planning Commission is to add all types of visitor accommodation, hotel extended stay, and bed and breakfast as allowed uses in the MUB1 zone district so that we can accommodate a potential hotel at CityCenter. And now I'd like to move to the commercial ground floor requirement. This was put in place in the mid-2000s. Basically, for the MUB1 zone district, there's a requirement that the ground floor, that 51% of the entire ground floor of a building must be devoted to commercial uses. It cannot be solely a housing project. And so that has been kind of hit or miss for us over time. It generally works very well for our historic Broadway frontage because we have very small lots along there, and there's a high demand for retail along the Broadway corridor. And so that hasn't been a problem there for us. However, it has been a problem on some of our more local streets that are off Broadway, such as Lincoln or Sherman or Acoma and Bannock Street. Those streets don't get a lot of traffic going by, and there's really not a lot of commercial activity going there right now anyway either. And there's just not a lot of demand for commercial uses along those streets. There's a lot more demand for residential uses, as people would like to live close to the historic Broadway corridor so they could walk back and forth. And then farther to the west, we have very large pieces of property such as the Englewood Marketplace, Inwood Plaza, and these areas that would be very difficult in this day and age to fill up with 51% commercial uses. And so what our recommendation is that we think this does work well for downtown Broadway Main Street. So the recommendation from Planning and Zoning Commission is to limit the commercial ground floor requirement to just the historic downtown Broadway Main Street area only, the 3300, 3400, and 3500 blocks of Broadway. And now let's get into the boundaries of the quarter-mile and half-mile station areas. This would be our boundaries for the transit station area overlay. This map to the left, you can see the CityCenter boundary in black outlined, and you can see at the very left, the blue star, which indicates the Englewood Light Rail Transit Station platform. We have these two semicircles in white that represent a quarter-mile distance from the station and a half-mile distance from the station. And so the Planning and Zoning Commission has designated the area in yellow, which is the original city center, the existing boundary, as our quarter-mile station area. And in the pink to the east has been designated as the half-mile station area. And the idea behind this is that you want to locate your most intensive land uses and densities closer to the station within the quarter-mile walking distance. Once you get a little bit farther away, it gets a little bit farther to walk. People with some disabilities might not be able as easily to walk that distance. And so the intensity should come down slightly gradually as we get towards the historic Broadway corridor. So the Planning and Zoning Commission has looked at a lot of different research that would support their TOD recommendations, a lot of transit-oriented development best practices. And one of the, a report that came up very recently that was very helpful to the commission was this report done by RTD, which is the Residential Parking and Stationaries, a study of Metro Denver, which was completed in December of 2020. The recent RTD residential parking study offers very strong evidence that required residential parking near light rail stations is significantly underutilized. Parking counts were conducted at 104 properties within 10-minute walk of the transit stations in April during the stay-at-home order, Tuesday through Thursday, 10 to 3. And they looked at market rate housing and income restricted housing. Market rate is regular rate rental properties, and income restricted is workforce housing, similar to the Broadway lofts in Englewood or maybe the Evans Station apartments to the north at Evans Avenue. For the market rate housing, they discovered that only 40% of the provided parking is not normally utilized. For the market rate properties, they typically have provided 1.23 spaces per unit, but only 0.74 spaces were found to be utilized. With the income restricted properties, a lot of these folks do not own cars, and they found that 50% of the provided parking was not utilized. And at these properties, typically 0.72 spaces have been provided historically, but only 0.36 spaces per unit were found to be utilized. And then RTD, to follow up on that, they wanted to make sure that they wanted to verify these April counts. So in September, they went back and visited 19 of these properties at night and got very similar results. And so the takeaway from this is that in the past, we have had kind of the wrong notions about TOD and transit stations. We realize that transit stations are a strong benefit for people's not needing to have as much, not to be as automobile dependent as people who live in suburbs away from transit. Yet we still feel that we need to require suburban style parking standards for these developments. And what this has shown us is that that's really not to be the case. And we've actually seen this here at Englewood CityCenter in the fact that when we look at the aerial photos of the Alexan Art Walk apartments, we see a lot of empty spaces that are just not utilized. Now that sometimes makes some people pretty happy to hear that, but also then it makes some people nervous. So I'd also wanted to reiterate, strongly suggest that we are also looking at strategies that we are expected to employ at CityCenter in support of these findings. Some of the things that we're looking to do is we're looking at shared utilization of the RTD park and ride spaces with other uses that have compatible parking patterns, so that uses such as living, residential might be able to park in the RTD parking lot at night when there's less demand for RTD patron parking at that time. We're also looking at expanding the shuttle bus service to maybe potentially nights and weekends, and maybe even looking at shorter headways or wait times, maybe reducing from 15 to 10 minutes. We'd also like to look at the soliciting bike share companies to service the Englewood Central business districts. You may see in downtown Denver that there's lots of these bicycles and scooters that are waiting for people on the corner to utilize. And we think that we could bring those types of services to Englewood as well. We'd also like to look at converting some free parking to reserved paid parking, particularly the parking garage to the west of the Alexan apartments. As you can see there on the top of that, there's no parking spaces taken up. And that might be a very attractive deal to make with the Alexan apartments to potentially lease some of those spaces to people who are willing to pay for a guaranteed space at the station. We also think we can convert some free parking to, or create, I got a little bit mixed up there. We also are thinking about the possibility of creating eco-pass neighborhoods where all of the residents in the city center area would be subsidized with an eco-pass. And if you're not aware of what eco-pass is, it is a pass that gives you unlimited rides on light rail and buses everywhere. And it's a really great benefit. And then finally, we think we can also look at the utilization of unused or underused existing private parking spaces through parking agreements. And some of those areas might be some of the Walmart parking, which the only time that that's fully utilized by Walmart is maybe just a week before Christmas. So we think that we might be able to do a deal with them. Or farther east, there's quite a bit of parking on the north side, just south of the Hobby Lobby there on Inwood Parkway. That might be another source of parking. So the Planning and Zoning Commission also then began to look at comparing our Englewood existing parking requirements with Denver and Aurora transit-oriented development parking requirements. And so for hotel use, if we have a hotel for 100 units, the Englewood existing parking requirement would require 100 spaces, one space per each hotel unit. For Denver and Aurora, respectively, they have cut that down to 50 spaces for a 100-unit hotel because they expect a lot of the people who stay in the hotel to get there via the light rail. And this is a difference from our existing requirement of about 50%. Office and retail is a similar story. We, for a 10,000 square foot office or retail space, Englewood's requirement today is 34 spaces per 10,000 square feet. For Denver and Aurora, respectively, they drop that for office to 13 or 10 spaces per 10,000 and retail from 13 to 15. Once again, they expect a lot of these people to actually come to the development through the light rail and not by car. And this represents a 60 to 70% or a 56 to 62% reduction in parking. And finally, for restaurant, Englewood's current existing restaurant parking requirement is considerably out of whack right now in the metro area. It would, for 10,000 square feet, our code requires 100 spaces. And once again, the Denver and Aurora parking requirements for TOD are considerably less, with a minus 70 to minus 80% difference. Let's look at building height now. Conceptual images produced by L&R Partners for the south half of the Block C, the Office Depot block. They are showing approximately 5 to 6 story buildings, and that is what SKB has also been envisioning. However, today, our current MUB1 maximum height is 100 feet, and that's considerably more than a 5 to 6 story building. The Chase and Wells Fargo's towers are 10-story buildings, and they are approximately 120 feet. And we found that many local developers of light rail station areas are choosing to build taller. And I have some examples here. To the upper left-hand corner is the Colorado Center at 15 stories and approximately 220 feet. At the lower left-hand corner, we have Bellevue Station at 15 stories and 190 feet. And that was from one of Bill's examples that he showed earlier. And then at the Broadway Station, this is yet to be built, but this is the Santa Fe Yards development. And this is primarily an office development, and they are proposing 10-story buildings at approximately 130 feet. And finally, on the right-hand side, I have the Denver Housing Authority at 10th and Osage Station, 11 stories and approximately 140 feet. Now for some Inwood building height examples to give you things that you're a little bit more familiar with, that you can more readily compare. We have on the left-hand side, the Waterford Condominiums project. That is the tallest building in Inwood at 170 feet. The second picture is the Chase Tower building, which is in the area that we are talking about, 120 feet. And then very close by, we have the Kivas condominiums, which is about 7 stories and 80 feet. And finally, we have the Live Apartments, about 5 stories and 60 feet. And at the bottom, you can kind of get a relative sense of the scale of these buildings compared to each other side by side. And so the Planning and Zoning Commission is kind of, has been focusing in closely on the Chase building as kind of our target height, our base zone standard height. And then let's shift over to multi-unit residential density and parking. The Inwood Light Rail Corridor Master Plan, which was developed through a grant from DRCOG in 2012-2013, recommends a maximum residential density standard of 125 units per acre. The recent apartment development projects that we have experienced here in this area have been more closer to 70 to 75 units per acre. A maximum density of 125 units per acre would yield a total of 375 units on the potential L&R Partners parcel, which is in line with what council has agreed to. So I'd like to direct you to the pictures to the left to give you a sense of the different densities that we have here in the city. The Art Walk 801 project, original to CityCenter, comes in at a density of about 47 units per acre. To the right of that, we have the Bell Cherry Hills project, which is just about maybe 5 years old. And that comes in at 72 units per acre. In the lower left-hand corner, we have the Oxford Station project. That comes in at about 70 units per acre. And then on the right-hand bottom corner, we have the Live Apartments at Englewood, Parkway, and Bannock Street. And even though that seems a little bit smaller than the other projects, because it's on such a small piece of land, it actually meets that pretty closely, that maximum density standard at 127 units per acre. The Planning and Zoning Commission's recommendation is to establish a minimum residential density for the station areas at 75 units per acre and a maximum residential density at 125 units per acre. Setting a TOD residential parking standard will create a lot of certainty for the buyer of the LNR Development Partners parcel, and they will be able to market that better because they will know what kind of density will be allowed there. City Council has endorsed a 350 plus or minus residential project on that south half of Block C, the Office Depot block. And at the proposed maximum density, the 3-acre site would yield 375 units. To achieve this, a parking ratio of 1 space per unit is necessary. A higher parking ratio would make 125 units per acre not likely to be achieved. And my examples here at the bottom of the page, we have the Bell Cherry Hills development, which features multi-floor parking at 1.5 spaces per unit, and that results in approximately 72 units per acre. On the other hand, we have the Live Apartments, which features first floor parking at 1.0 spaces per unit. And with this lower parking ratio, they are able to achieve closer to that 125 units per acre that we are looking as our maximum. Structured park, we are expecting structured parking to take the place of today's existing surface parking regime. Structured parking, however, is more expensive than surface parking. Structured parking is typically $35,000 per space against $10,000 per space for surface parking. The amount of required parking spaces will have a large impact on the overall project cost. At 375 units at 1 space per unit times $35,000 equals a project cost for parking at $13.1 million. If we go to 1.5 spaces per unit for those same units, it equals 563 spaces times 35,000, or a project total of 19.7 million. For a difference of 6.5 million, which is a significant cost that will only take away from the some of the benefits, the amenities that we want to provide on site. The higher parking costs will render the city center site as unattractive and uncompetitive in the market, and a competitive and cost-effective parking standard must be approved as part of the base rezoning. To recap, the next 2 slides will recap the Planning and Zoning Commission's recommendation. For residential density, the existing standard that we have today, we typically can reach 50 to 70 units per acre. The Planning and Zoning Commission has recommended a maximum density of 125 acres to be applied to both the half-mile and quarter-mile. However, there may be adjustments in the quarter-mile where negotiators for the city may be able to negotiate higher densities through the TSA overlay site plan approval process. And then for residential density for minimums, we currently have none, but the Planning and Zoning Commission feels that we should establish a minimum density to make sure that we're getting the right mix and the right amount of development here near the stations. And they are proposing a minimum density of 75 units per acre in both the half-mile and the quarter-mile area. For a height standard, our existing height is 100 feet in the MUB1. The Planning and Zoning Commission is recommending 125 feet to meet approximately the Chase Tower and the Wells Fargo Tower. Also with the caveat that within the quarter mile, that there may be a possibility to negotiate a taller height through the TSA site plan approval process. In regards to residential parking, the Planning and Zoning Commission recommends standards for both multi-unit residential market rate apartments and multi-unit residential income restricted apartments. The existing standard that we have today for both of those is 1.5 spaces per unit. The Planning and Zoning Commission is recommending for the half mile for market rate as 1 space per unit and 0.75 spaces per unit for the income restricted. And then for the quarter mile area, going down to 0.75 spaces per unit for the market rate and 0.5 spaces per unit for the income restricted. And once again, these may be negotiated lower through the negotiation process for the site plan approval process within the quarter mile. For commercial parking, the Planning and Zoning Commission decided to go in a little bit different direction. Rather than establishing standards that are very concrete, they prefer to establish more of a guideline of a range of reduction. So for hotel, our existing standard is 1 space per unit. And for the half mile area, they have proposed being able to negotiate a 0 to 25% reduction from there. And within the quarter mile area, a 25 to 50% reduction. For office retail, very similar story. Our existing standard is 3.33 spaces per 1,000. Once again, a 0 to 25% potential reduction in the half mile and a 25 to 50% reduction within the quarter mile. And then for restaurant, the commission has opted to use a little bit different standard for our existing standard for the baseline. We're going to use something that's more common to our neighboring cities of 5 spaces per 1,000 square feet. And we would then be able to negotiate with the developer within the half mile, a 0 to 25% reduction, and then within the quarter mile, a 25 to 50% reduction from there. And so that's the recap of the rezoning recommendation. And so to give you kind of a sense of the anticipated rezoning schedule, early here in May, we're planning to go back to our Planning and Zoning Commission for a study session to go over the feedback that we get this evening. And they may make some small tweaks to this recommendation. If so, we will then be able to start moving forward to a Planning and Zoning public hearing. And that would probably most likely take place in later June. And then the process would move over to the City Council, and the City Council would also hold its own public hearing, most likely in later July. And then they would finally City Council would take it up for a vote in August and possibly early September at first and second reading. So that concludes our presentation this evening. So now we're going to start the questions and discussions segment of the evening. And I'll just go through the rules again. The staff will start by going through each of the questions asked in the chat box. Staff will then open up the floor to allow the audience to give verbal feedback on the information presented this evening. Please use the raise hand icon to signal to the meeting moderator that you would like to make a comment, and wait for the meeting moderator to call your name. Each speaker will be allocated 3 minutes. And once again, please visit our project webpage for more information, www.engaged.inglewood.gov/citycenter-redevelopment. And once again, if you have questions later on after this presentation is over, you can also submit them at any time to myself, John Voberil, by phone or email at 303-783-6993. 6820 or J V as in Victor, OBORIL at inglewoodco.gov. And now at this time, I would like to bring in Wade Burkholder, and he will start us off by reading off the questions that are in the chat box.
Thank you, John. Our first question is from Tim Anderson. One of the biggest issues with the current situation is that when people park and walk to the light rail, they are not directed through the retail area, so no activity through the plaza at all. How is this being resolved?
Dan, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, thank you, John. Good question. That's really was one of the fatal flaws in the original city center plan. There was a thought that all those parkers would somehow linger in the retail and service areas, but of course, transit passengers doing what they do, they're too anxious to get either on the train, on the bus, or home. But one of the things we are working towards is a negotiation with RTD that would allow us to reduce the total amount of RTD shared parking on site, which is now really a rather massive number of 910 spaces. We think there's a solid rationale to reduce that significantly and then move the balance around on site as the redevelopment plan comes together. And one of the specific goals would be to actually take the shared RTD parking and make sure that a significant portion of that is put at a distance from the station, rather than using all of the best station adjacent land for parking. Let's put it away, let's put it around, spread it around a little bit. And among other things, we think the Englewood trolley can be improved and used as a connector to more distant parking.
Dan, can I also chime in?
Yeah, Bill.
One of the other conversations we anticipate with RTD is the potential of where the bus transfer happens and the bus station stops, we have looked at a couple of concepts of pulling that away from the underside of the bridge and having the bus transfer happen more along Englewood Parkway so that people do need to walk past the retail. We recognize that that's a key component to activating the space and attracting the users on the ground floor. So with lots of upcoming conversations with RTD about parking, location of parking, as well as where the transfers can happen, we think can really start to generate some ground floor activity from the transit users.
Okay, thank you. Our second question comes from James Levy. And building upon the TOD perspective, what additional safe connectivity is being considered for bicycle accessibility and parking? This is an especially automobile-oriented area framed by Santa Fe and Hampden and currently dangerous for alternative transit options such as biking. I believe consideration is critical for density anticipated.
I'll take that question. Yes, this is John Boberil, and I am the senior planner, and I am a specialist in pedestrian and alternative mode transportation, such as bicycles. And yes, you are absolutely right that was not thought of at all. Bicycles were not thought of at all in the current existing development, and except for maybe the little Dry Creek Trail, and that was maybe not done the best either. So yes, we have worked on in our stationary master plan and in our walk and wheel master bicycle plan. The city has completed those in the last 5 to 10 years. And those call for specifically for looking at specific streets within city center and beyond to develop dedicated on-street bicycle facilities. And those would include specifically Inglewood Parkway and Floyd Avenue as east-west connectors. And I'm actually currently today, I was attending a Dr. Cog training exercise for an upcoming grant study potential that I have been thinking about using as a potential for a conceptual study of both the Inglewood Parkway and the Hampden Avenue corridor to begin to revision these streets as bicycle friendly streets.
Okay. The next is more of a comment. If the city of Englewood is committed to making the plaza more pedestrian friendly, I would like to see it ban all public smoking around the city center building to include the RTD light rail station and the bus stops below the station. I can't stand the foul pollution I must often walk through to patronize the library or to access RTD services. So that again was more of a comment. The next is from Anonymous. Is there any consideration to incorporate planning and development for the south side of Hampden, specifically the previous Sports Authority site and surrounds? Let's build a quality city center destination area rather than a single block area flanked by blight. Any thoughts on that?
Wade, I can take that on. As you're aware, you know, for some of the projects that are in development planning on the south side of Hampden, one of the thoughts we've had is how to connect them better with City Center, and the Inwood trolley is a obvious. One of our hopes is that with now the Downtown Development Authority in place, we have potentially an opportunity to utilize that to generate funding to improve the trolley and to extend its reach. And one of the obvious places would try to be to extend it south of Hampden. So, because that's a very unsafe, unfriendly place to try and cross. We think we can do that. We think we have enough multifamily projects in the queue that there's some significant developer contributions that could be explored, and that with that we could get at least that transit connectivity to the south of Hampden, which would be very good, help really draw those projects into the city center identity and marketing opportunities. So I think that's probably one of the immediate opportunities that we have. The other one is that there's a congestion study that's underway on Hampden on 285, and it will be looking at various aspects of pedestrian and improving pedestrian connectivity to the south side as well. And that would be a big benefit as well.
And also, we also have programmed into our capital improvements programs in the next few years for funding for the Inwood Rail Trail. And the Inwood Rail Trail features a trail that is parallel to the light rail line and features pedestrian bridges over Oxford Avenue, Hampden Avenue, and Dartmouth Avenue. And that would very much make a much more safer connection for the new development that would happen, that is potentially going to happen south of 285, and providing a pedestrian bridge where people can bypass all that heavy traffic on Hampden with a straight shot to the station.
Very good, thank you. Next question is, have you considered master planning all the way from Broadway? The idea of having taller buildings is a nice idea, especially along Hampden, but adding tall buildings just near the light rail could impact the land values west if you start blocking mountain views.
So in regards to Broadway, we decided to stop there at the kind of where we get to those properties where our historic Broadway district is, and back to Acoma and the King Suburbs. We felt that is kind of a different area that needs to be treated a little bit differently than the transit station areas. We, for instance, we don't really want to see a 100-foot tall building on Broadway there, because we want to keep the character as we have it today. So eventually we would probably at some point would like to revisit that area in a different planning process. But at this time, we felt that we should probably leave that alone for now. In terms of views, that's an interesting question. We don't, because the hospitals are directly to the east, that may not be as impactful as it might seem. But we are generally cognizant of views as well.
Thank you. Next question from James Levy again. What population of resident are you seeking to attract with such low parking ratios? Even with the nearby transit facilities, this area is highly dependent on and passionate about their cars.
You know, I might take that way. We had lots of discussion about that with the Planning and Zoning Commission, and specifically about kind of the different parking expectations of the different generations. And one of the things we really got to ultimately is we have a huge surplus of parking at CityCenter, largely due to this 910 pool, 910 spaces pool of parking that's shared with RTD. That's spread across the overall development, although it's primarily in 2 spots now. As I mentioned, we hope we can spread it further and make it more accessible. But the reality is that when you look at those parking spots and some of the other parking spots that John pointed out, which are all in addition to, totally, completely in addition to the parking ratios that John outlined both today and proposed, the total effective parking ratio is off the charts. I mean, it's there's a massive surplus of parking. So from that perspective, the reduced parking ratios that John spoke to, although they're technically assigned to each building, the effective amount of parking within a very, very short walk for almost any vertical project is going to be considerably above market.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Next question is from Teresa Adams. Any consideration for a space for boutique grocery, such as Markzik or Trader Joe's?
Dan, do you want me to take this one?
Go ahead.
I think we would absolutely welcome that type of user. We're actually the architects for the last few Markzik stores. So I think it would be a very good fit that would obviously service people within CityCenter as well as the neighborhood surrounding it. So we would very much be in favor of that.
Okay, thank you, Bill. The next question from Kurt Holberg. Are the parking studies from April and September available for public review, and how do we get them? And the second part of the question is, in the parking studies, how many of the structures were paid for parking, similar to Bell Cherry Creek and other apartment buildings?
So I will go ahead and see. I believe I will ask RTD if it's possible for us to publish or attach that report to our project webpage that I have here listed, engaged.ingwoodco.gov/citycenter-redevelopment. And we'll see if we can put that up there. But if you want to Google it, that's how I found it. You can just, you probably will be able to find it yourself by putting in RTD parking study. That might get you there too. but we'll see if we can put it on there. And also, why don't you just, if you email me, I can just attach it to an email and send it right over to you. So my email here is at the bottom of the screen, jvoberil@inglewoodco.gov. So feel free to punch me a line, and I'll get that over to you. As terms of the paid parking, I think it was kind of a mix, as I recall, that some of the developments are geared towards where the residents must pay additional for parking, and some of the other projects were others where it was unbundled.
Okay, thank you, John. Stephanie Brooks asks, what will happen to the current businesses with leases in the city center vicinity?
I would say that in our work with L&R, they are working to manage a lot of those leases to essentially shorten them and to add termination provisions. Some of those tenants, quite frankly, are kind of at the point where due to COVID impacts, et cetera, they're kind of ready to leave on their own, just as part of their regular consolidation plans. So we don't expect any tenants who are doing great at CityCenter to be put out. There's transition efforts underway. The other thing is we're dealing with a certain amount of time here before there's a breaking of ground. And so that will also ease the impacts. But as we deal with SKB and L&R, certainly any tenants who are doing well and are growing and want to stay, that will be given a lot of consideration.
Okay, next is a question from Anonymous. As a resident living very close to City Center, my main concern is how we can walk to City Center to use the amenities. Right now, crossing the major roadways is not terribly pedestrian friendly. So is there a plan to improve the walkways around City Center, specifically Floyd Avenue, Hampden, and Englewood Parkway?
I would just go back to part of my prior answer on that. There's a great sensitivity to it, in terms of making the crossings and the connectivity safer and more convenient for pedestrians. We really want to expand the impact of City Center as it's redeveloped. And so reaching out into the surrounding neighborhoods and encouraging pedestrian connectivity is really important. And as I mentioned, I think the Englewood trolley can be one tool that extends, that connectivity. As John mentioned, there's a great deal of sensitivity to bike connections as well, and improving bike paths, and I think that's another part of the overall formula.
We have several people asking the similar question. Ellis Arnold, Vicky Howard, Stephanie Brooks. If the City of Englewood's offices move out of the current Englewood Civic Center to allow for redevelopment, where are the city's offices expected to move to? And they also add, where will the library end up going? So
there's a range of answers to that, Wade. As you know, our partner SKB has looked at probably a half dozen different possible locations for the city offices. Generally speaking, they would all be in City Center, and I think that's highly probable. There's clearly one scenario where the city could stay in the current building and perhaps the parking gets reconfigured. The reality is, though, the way the current Civic Center building sits on the site, and particularly when you look at the way its parking garage sits on the site, it takes up, and I think Bill mentioned this, a massive amount of space. And the most valuable space on the entire site. So the city has a huge opportunity cost that's associated with keeping its offices in the current building, but that's still going to be looked at over time. So as we sit here today, there continues to be a good number of options, and we don't know what the final answer is. As far as the library and even the Museum of Outdoor Arts go, there's a general thought that by perhaps separating them a bit from the city offices themselves, there'd be an opportunity to re-energize them, get them more notoriety, if you will, out in the public. So there's a thought about also perhaps spreading them around a little bit within the Civic Center area, and also using their their presence to activate some of the areas that we've all recognized as being less active than we'd like to see.
Thank you. Has adaptive reuse of the Civic Center into multifamily residential or hotel combined with retail on the ground level been thoroughly studied? The argument that it has poor exterior materials could be applied to the former 24-hour fitness building, but that's being kept. It appears it could support the amount of hotel keys that are desired, and adaptive reuse is a great way to maintain some Englewood history while providing new uses. That question is from Anonymous.
I'll start that out and then kick it to Bill. Yeah, I think the adaptive reuse of the Civic Center building, it has been looked at. It'll continue to be looked at. Again, because of some of the things Bill mentioned, it's not a particularly high quality building in terms of its frame or its economic life or what it was anticipated to be used for. So it's not an easy refit. Also, the way it sits on the site and the parking facility is starting to have some serious maintenance problems with it. So it's possible that it would have to be completely rebuilt. So there's some inherent costs in whatever we do with that building that really impact the city financially, on top of the fact that we're not benefiting in terms of revenue flows from the value of that property. Bill?
I think you covered it pretty well there, Dan. I think just one comment on the other building is when we did that plan a number of, quite a while ago now, the 24-hour fitness was still in business. So we just quickly assumed that would stay in place until something happened there. We haven't really done a test fit for if the city stays intact and wants to fit in one building, would it even fit in that building? So really working with the city to reprogram how the city sees itself evolving going forward. Adjacencies and sizes of offices, especially in post-COVID world, is something that still needs to be studied. So we're not suggesting the existing building, the 24-hour fitness has to stay and be repurposed. It could be removed and repurposed as well. It was just a placeholder at the time.
Thank you. The next question is from Eric Villarreal. Is there any plans for the north side of Dartmouth? And if I could interject there real quick myself. City Council has recently approved a site development plan to redevelop the old Winslow Crane site at Dartmouth and Galapagos in that northwest corner for approximately 203 multifamily residential units. So there is a development plan on that parcel. I'll turn it over to John or Dan if they have anything else to add to that question.
No, we do not foresee anything connected with this project north of Dartmouth, other than maybe the connecting rail trail to that area.
And next question is from Vicky Howard. I am very concerned about light rail parking. Pre-pandemic levels had the parking lots packed. As we return to normal, parking levels during COVID does not seem practical. How are you planning on the future?
A couple of aspects to that, Vicky. We actually had studied the parking utilization here at CityCenter through a couple different sources prior to COVID. And one of the things both we and RTD observed that other than maybe some specific, very, very limited peak times, parking utilization was actually trending down. And that's something that's been seen in basically all classes of parking facilities across the United States. So, but there's no doubt that those lots were much fuller pre-COVID than they are today. And the utilization today, we just met with some RTD representatives, is running at 6%. And basically transit agencies across the United States are expecting that it will be years and years and years before transit shared parking returns to anything close to pre-COVID levels. So that's one of the things that is going to drive our discussions with RTD about reducing that parking specifically for commuters, because we don't think there'll be that level of job-related commuting to downtown. Now we can replace that with all kinds of other needs that will drive parking and then utilize the parking. But the facts actually favor, I think, what we're anticipating doing. And again, I just go back to some of John's illustrations. There is, even if we were to reduce that RTD shared parking by, say, a third or even a half here at CityCenter, the pool of parking would still be massive. And especially when you combine it with the other surface parking that's available here. And so one of the things we will probably need is a parking management plan as we go forward that basically tells parkers where parking spaces are located and tells them how to reach those spaces so that we really leverage the amount of parking that we do have and not just confine it to the two areas where it's historically been.
Hey, Dan, if I could add one comment to that. If you recall, the study that we received from RTD about who's parking at Englewood City Center really revealed itself that the significant amount of people outside of the city of Englewood were driving to City Center and parking and then taking the light rail. And they were doing that because it's free parking. So RTD actually plotted where every single parker came over a pretty significant period of time. And it was really eye-opening, I think, to not only the city, but also to RTD as to how the station was being utilized. Since the light rail system now is mostly built out compared to when it was here, Englewood is seen by RTD as a Englewood-based station, not a regional-based station. So RTD was actually very open to looking at reducing the parking as well because of who their riders were. And this was done pre-pandemic. So it was a very interesting piece of data that we received directly from RTD.
The next question here is, would the city consider changing the intersection at Englewood Parkway and Galapagos to favor east-west traffic flow versus north-south traffic movement? Whether I'm traveling by motor vehicle or by bicycle, I often find it challenging to travel in an east or west direction on Englewood Parkway at this intersection because of vehicles moving north or south along Galapagos.
I think, yes, that the question, the answer to that is yes, I think that it could be a consideration. Because we are looking to repurpose Inglewood Parkway as a dedicated bicycle facility, to enhance that, we would probably prefer to prioritize their movements over the north-south traffic. And so that would probably apply to the automobile traffic as well.
And the last question I have is a two-parter. How would the homeless and high drug-related activity be addressed at the new outdoor area? And is there a public report available on the sagging structure of the existing civic center?
I would say on the homeless aspect, you know, the whole homeless topic was of great importance in the Downtown Matters initiative over the last year, and is addressed pretty heavily within the downtown plan of development, which is the driving business plan of the Englewood Downtown Development Authority. And so there are, you know, a number of measures that are identified in terms of safety officers, et cetera, and measures to better connect the homeless to resources. So there's a great deal of sensitivity to it. And, you know, clearly we don't have all the answers, but it is intended to be part of the focus of the Downtown Development Authority going forward. And just for everybody's remembrance, the top goal of the DDA is to connect CityCenter, South Broadway, and the medical district as a unified, larger, stronger downtown Englewood, which it has not been because these three sub areas have always operated so independently. So that addresses that. On the building itself, I don't know of a report specifically. I just go back to Bill Moon's familiarity with the original architecture and engineering. And then on the parking garage, we're just visually observing some really significant maintenance issues over time.
Okay, thank you. Those were the questions I had in the question and answer, so we can turn it over to anybody that has hands raised.
Looks like we've got Bay Mai. If you can unmute yourself, you'll have 3 minutes to talk.
Actually, it was a mistake. I didn't accidentally click on it.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to speak? Has any questions?
I do have one more in the question and answer, and that is, what is the timing for the start of construction, if you have any idea on this?
I would just venture a guess on that I don't have a solid idea. We really have some significant milestones that we need to get over, particularly this year as we work on the redevelopment plan, work on negotiating the master development agreement. You know, there's a big impact of potentially the Downtown Development Authority and a possible reconsideration of the DDA TIF debt, which would be a really, really important tool to finance some of the public improvements needed to facilitate city center redevelopment. So long story short, this is a really intense year. It's been delayed by COVID significantly, but I think we're seeing the real estate market jump back strongly, probably you know, more strongly than we were anticipating. So I would say we could anticipate a master development agreement perhaps early 2022. And, you know, we could potentially see a groundbreaking later in the year, next year again. And that's all going to be dependent on whether we're talking about the early projects being new buildings or renovation and reuse, adaptive reuse of existing structures. So that's probably the best I can come up with.
Looks like we have Ellis. Ellis has a question. If you can unmute yourself, you have 3 minutes.
Hi, yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll be short here. Just wanted to know, are there any plans for affordable housing in the anticipated new apartment buildings that might occupy city center in terms of subsidized units or requiring new apartment buildings to have a certain number of units that are below market rate?
Ellis, there's not anything formal at present. The community development staff is certainly aware of city council's growing sensitivity, public's growing sensitivity to affordable and attainable housing. So I think in one form or another, there will be a concern about that in city center. That's a priority of the downtown plan for the DDA. So I think we'll see it considered on a project by project basis, and developers who I think bring a sensitivity to that goal in their entitlement process and their discussions with planning staff will probably do a lot better with their projects to the extent that they have that sensitivity. Also, the other thing that crosses my mind is as we think about renegotiating some of the parking with RTD, they are very concerned about affordable housing. So there might be a trade-off of some affordable housing requirements in whatever the amendment of the past agreements with RTD are. But long story short, I think in one form or another, it's going to be a bigger piece of the overall puzzle. It just has to be at City Center.
Got it. Thank you very much.
Looks like Jeremy has a question. If you can unmute yourself, you have 3 minutes.
Yes, I was wondering specifically about the city's plans as far as the redevelopment goes for the potential ability to create a more wheelchair accessible development as far as the city goes, because I know that in terms of grading as far as getting up hills and whatnot and getting over curbs and whatnot, that it can be sometimes be somewhat of a hazard. So I was wondering what your initial thoughts are on accessibility of getting around the site plan for people with disabilities. Thank you.
I'll start out on that one, John. You probably have some thoughts too. We're now in pretty active conversations with both Swedish and Craig, and ramping up our collective sensitivity to that level of accessibility for the health challenged. We do know that we have a big population here, not only related to the hospitals, but to some of our elderly residents. And so there's a growing sensitivity about that. I hate to keep using that word, but it's probably the best phrase that captures kind of where the city is and where the Downtown Development Authority is, and specifically how some of these topics are addressed and prioritized in the downtown plan. So I think accessibility for the health challenged, again, will just be a growing piece of everything that we do. One of the projects that the Downtown Development Authority is looking at, for example, is the pursuit of grants for improvements to the paseos and the connecting crosswalk on Broadway. And there's a realization that we have to make those spaces more accessible, as well as the parking that connects to them. Then in terms, where you go from those spaces, whether you're accessing the medical district, unfortunately, which is all uphill, or CityCenter. But there's just a growing sensitivity to that and to the reality that we have that population that we need to be concerned about in Englewood.
Wade, it looks like you have some more questions.
Let's see. I have one question. Who is paying for this redevelopment plan and the resulting construction?
The goal is to, partner with the private sector as much as we can and pass the cost to the private sector, master developer, as well as independent vertical developers. And at the same time that they're bearing the cost to ultimately try to monetize the value of the property to be a revenue generator for the city, both in terms of single time transactions as well as annual revenues. So just by way of example, as we've negotiated the extension of the pre-development agreement with SKB and their architect planner, Tribal Architects, they've put in to date well over $400,000 in planning expenses. So those are dollars that the city has not had to expend. The other source of funding on some of these things are grants. We got a significant next step grant from Dr. Cog in 2019, and it's what really allowed us to go forward with the Downtown Development Authority, and that in total, including the city local match, was $241,000. So for a small city like Englewood that's financially limited, has a lot of other calls on its general budget, we have to be clever. We have to find ways of partnering with the private sector, looking for grants, and really everything else we can. I mentioned the public finance tools to basically be able to find funding for the overall redevelopment plan.
Hey, Dan, if I could add a comment to that that's somewhat analogous to this, is in addition to financial, that the private sector would also be carrying. One of the things at CityCenter currently is that the CityCenter itself programmatically and from a maintenance perspective is done by the city. And that's not taking anything away from the city, but one of the things that the private developer will definitely be interested in offer and really push is programming this space. It is vital and in their financial interest that people patronize this place. The vision that we have is such that this is the city of Englewood's place. And how do we drive people there that are not only, again, living, working, and playing there, but from Englewood? So really getting creative with what it looks like, how it's maintained and cleaned, as well as the program that's in there. Every weekend, something should be going on, if not every night. That's really the goal. And the financial incentive is built into the private developer to really capitalize on that. So again, not only creating place, but creating the program and having the financial wherewithal to support the program and continue the high level of maintenance and improvements on the site is really something that's in the private developer's interest.
Is there anybody that would like to speak?
I have,
okay.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Wade.
Okay, sorry about that. Vicky Howard asks, there are so many empty commercial units right now, some that have never been occupied. How will this new development be different in attracting tenants for these spaces?
I'll probably have two quick answers on that. One really draws on exactly what Bill was talking about, because the common areas and the overall project are managed by the city and its real estate entity, Englewood Environmental Foundation. There's not been any focus over the last 20 years on branding, marketing, or programming of public spaces. And that's just really a shame and a missed opportunity. And so I think once those things can be addressed through the private sector development partner, we can fill up spaces more easily in the city center area. One of the things the redevelopment plan is looking at doing is getting ownership of what we refer to as the Plaza retail space, which is on the north side of the Plaza and the fountain, transferred to the master developer SKB. That's about 18,000 square feet of space that's been sparsely occupied over the last 20 years. And again, with under the control of the master developer with programming, we think that space can be pretty special. We even think that there are possibilities that certain components of the library or the Museum of Outdoor Arts could go into that space and really help activate and make that an interesting, busy, bustling space that attracts people. The other thing I'll mention is that with regard to the occupancy and / vacancy in downtown, there's an issue there, and COVID has definitely impacted that. We think that the Downtown Development Authority can do a lot in terms of creating some strategies for attracting tenants downtown. And, we may have a good situation in terms of tenants being wanting to move out of more crowded environments like downtown Denver. So I would see that as an increasing trend. We have some new employers who have taken downtown retail spaces and done some great, renovations. Core Consulting being one on South Broadway. They have a roster of probably 60 to 80 employees. They're not all in the building now, but they just moved into that building, a month and a half ago. And so that's a whole new audience of customers for our downtown restaurants and merchants. And I think the Downtown Development Authority can bring more focus on that and find a better balance between retailers and employers for our downtown buildings.
And Dan, if I could just add on real briefly, the reality of CityCenter is a lot of the retail is controlled by a multifamily operator. They're really not in the business of leasing retail. In fact, they fought the city on it in a lawsuit. And you can see a lot of that storefront has never really been occupied because that's not their core business. We also had, unfortunately, a developer that allowed they went into receivership. So they weren't paying attention to the retail either. So I think having a financial stake in the development by the master developer, and that they're paying attention to this, and if they don't lease out these spaces to the highest quality users, they're going to take a financial hit. They will be significantly motivated to turn this around in a way that CityCenter has not seen, because you had, as I said before, half of the side of the street of Englewood Parkway has been empty because it's run by apartment operators, not people that know how to really get in and work through retail. So we're excited to see what the market will draw. So there's a school of thought that's really taking place in Denver, which is curating your retail, not just sitting back and putting a sign up and waiting to see who comes, but really working with the local businesses. You're starting to see that. We see that at the Crawford Hotel in lower downtown. That was curated. Bellevue Station has curated the retail. They've pulled out there's national chains, but they've also pulled in some small business owners purposely that are putting up their second restaurant or things like that. We really think working and focusing on specifically small business owners that are looking for a place and an audience to bring their wares and their food and beverages. And Englewood, we think, really fits that nicely. The growing demographic of South Broadway, the emergence of the medical center, what's going to be happening to the south of the site, it all points towards this becoming a place that is time to really think through and think in a fresh, new, bold way.
John, I don't see any more hands up. If you have any final thoughts.
Yes, I think we're at pretty much at the end of our time. It looks like Brad does have some final thoughts, so I'm going to hand it over to him.
Well, thanks, John, and also to Dan and to Bill. Appreciate it. But really, thank you to everybody who joined us this evening. I think there were some excellent comments and questions. And we wanted to hold true to our time, our promised time of 8:30, so you can get on with the rest of your evening. But what I would suggest is please do stay in touch through Englewood Engaged. John had the complete website there, but if you just go to the city's website and click on Englewood Engaged Englewood, you can't miss it. In fact, there's a couple of other pretty significant city projects that you may be interested in as well. But once you get into that area, you can leave comments, you can see what's coming up, all the meetings that will be happening going forward into the future. So we, again, really appreciate your participation tonight, and stay tuned. There's a lot of excitement to come. You can tell that this is both a really interesting, challenging, and hopefully very exciting project for the future of the community. So again, thank you to everyone who joined us this evening. Have a pleasant rest of your evening. Thanks again.